G'day shooters. InfiRay has been moving into the Australian market pretty aggressively with some good thermal scopes. They've come in with high specifications at really attractive prices, and currently the Ricoh range is their top of the line setup. And even then, even at top of the line, their prices top out at about $6,300, which for thermal stuff is quite reasonable, as I'm sure you'd know. I've been using both thermal scopes in the Ricoh series, the RH50 and the RL42. And the short version of the story is they're both very impressive devices, and more so when you work out the value. Let's begin with the impressive specs. The InfiRay Ricoh RH50, which is the top one, that's got a sensor measuring 640 by 512 pixels, which is as good as it gets in today's market. And that means greater clarity and detail, which is a strong point for the RH50. The scope's 12 micron pixel size is well entrenched size now in the market, and InfiRay appears to have made the most of it with a compact package that provides above average image quality. The other thing is the heat differentiation ability, which boils down to its 40 millikelvin rating, which is also an impressive figure that essentially says it's more sensitive to differences in heat than a lot of the other thermal scopes out there on the market now. In comparison, the cheaper Ricoh RL42, using the same body, is virtually identical in spec, but only packs a 384 by 288 pixel sensor. That's where the money saving is. The image you see, though noticeably less distinct and a bit more pixelated, isn't that far behind the quality of the RH50. Having looked through both, the question of whether to spend another $1,900 or so on the better image is a hard one to answer, except to say that you should probably buy the best one you can afford. Value for dollar, both scopes are probably pretty much on a par. One advantage that the lesser Ricoh has, the 42, is the larger field of view, 6.3 degrees as opposed to 5.3 degrees. Not a huge difference, but it's there. As for magnification, you're effectively getting a 3 to 12 by scope in the RH50 and a 4 to 16 scope in the RL42. But as 16 times in the RL42 is pretty pixelated, I don't see it as that its high magnification is really any more useful than the RH50s. On the other hand, if you reckon you can get an extra $1,900 worth of advantage out of the RH50's 2600 metre detection range over the RL42's 2200, good on you. I can't. I didn't get the chance to accurately test those detection ranges, but I did clearly pick up targets at a bit over 2,000 metres with the RH50. I had no idea what they were, calves as it turned out, but at least I knew there was something there. Size and weight and everything else are as good as identical between the two scopes. The tiny differences aren't really worth detailing here. They appear to be very solidly built with all alloy bodies, and the only plastic is the lens cap. The scopes have a 3-year warranty and they're rated for 300 Win-Mag recoil, so they'll take a fair pounding. Each Ricoh comes boxed with a padded carry case, a pair of 4400 milliamp batteries, a charger, an aluminium alloy mount and a special tool for the mount. Having both batteries is a boon, and they'll last up to 6 hours. I never quite worked out a predictable time span, but 4 to 6 hours seems to be about right depending upon how you're using the scope and whether you've got a rangefinder attached to it. And I'll talk in a minute about the rangefinder. If you need them, you can buy more batteries to keep going indefinitely. They'll cost you $240 each, and there appears to be no aftermarket alternative to InfiRay's own ones, but it does mean that you've got a lot more flexibility than having a single built-in battery. Now, I talked about the mount. It's a really good piece of kit. It's included in the Ricoh's price, and yeah, real beauty. It's very good quality, has a quick release system that's extremely secure because of the design. The tool that you get helps you adjust it tightly to fit your rail, even if the rail isn't made to spec, and when the clamps are pushed down, they sit flush where they can't be accidentally dislodged. To release them, all you've got to do is press the button on the side, which raises the clamp enough to get your fingers under, and it comes off. If necessary, you can move the scope fore and aft on the mount itself, but if you're using a typical Picatinny on your rifle's receiver, you shouldn't need to bother. With around 55mm of eye relief, the scope can be placed exactly where it should be. I tried dismounting and remounting the scope to see if it returned to zero, and within a centimetre or two at 100 metres, it always did. My choice would be to check it every time, but if you're in a position where you can't, then you'd be confident the scope will be spot on when you shoot. I did that with a Fox, and I nailed the Fox after mounting the scope. It's almost impossible to estimate distance when you're looking through a thermal imager. Unless you know the lie of the land, you've really got no hope. So a rangefinder is essential if you're aiming to go beyond your rifle's point blank range. InfiRay offers a clip-on laser rangefinder for about $700. When active, it displays the target range in a small box at the top right of the screen, with a choice of either continuous or single readings. The continuous ones range wherever you point the scope, and the single one only measures when you actually press a button to tell it to do so. I missed these pigs on the trot because they were 250, 300 metres away, but I didn't have a rangefinder in use at the time, and I had no idea that they were that far off. The rifle was zeroed bang on at 100 metres, so these shots went way too low. You can see why you need a rangefinder for a thermal. My rangefinder seemed to be about 10% out in its ranging, but it's not a problem I've heard others mention, and the unit will be checked when it goes back to the importer after this review, but it did prove to be a fault that I had to deal with, and I'm sure that if it had been proved, or if it was mine anyway, it would have been covered under warranty, so I've got no real issue with that. This rangefinder also didn't seem to reactivate when I woke up the scope from standby mode. I had to restart the scope to get it to operate again. Another glitch, probably. Again, I couldn't find any complaints about this behaviour, and the importer wasn't aware of it, but if that was the case, I'd hope that they'd cover it under warranty. The Ricoh weighs less than 850 grams all up, and it's not overly bulky. In fact, for a thermal, it's a fairly compact unit. A knob up on the front on top adjusts focus, and the eyepiece adjusts the diopter for your eye. One thing I like is that the depth of field on the Ricoh is pretty generous. And even if you don't perfect the focus for a target, you can still see clearly and shoot quite well enough to get a result. Finding focus was always quick anyway, so you're not fiddling around and getting frustrated while you're looking for a clear image. The control buttons are arranged along the top of the body, with the main menu button raised between the two secondary buttons in a way that makes it intuitive to use them without looking. Going through the menus is straightforward once you've learnt the basic structure of them, so you've got no worries there. The buttons are large and tactile, though on sub-zero nights with bulky gloves on, I sometimes had to muck around until I was hitting the right buttons, but generally the setup is really good to use. Zeroing for the Ricoh works like most of these devices. You fire a shot on target, enter the menu, and then use the buttons to move the reticle to the point of impact. Bingo, theoretically you've got the one-shot zero, provided of course that your rifle and you are reliable, repeatable shots, of course. I like the fact that when adjusting the reticle, you can also see measurements displayed on the screen. So you can move it, say, 2.5 centimetres left if you've measured it, that's what's required, rather than doing it by eye. It's handy given that the bullseye is often a bit pixelated when you're looking through the scope and hard to tell exactly where you're looking, but with a pair of binoculars on your target, you can generally see by the grid how far out you are. So I was using those measurements quite a lot rather than doing it by eye. The scope features the expected things you get in a thermal, like picture-in-picture imaging, with the picture-in-picture twice the magnification of the main image. It's got a compass and an inclinometer, and all sorts of other thermal display options: red hot, black hot, white hot, colour palette, and a highlight mode. I won't talk about the pros and cons of them here now in this review. I'll just say that each of them has its own advantages, and the Ricoh scopes make excellent use of all of them. And that brings me to image quality at last. It's very good. Yes, you can spend a mozza on a high-end thermal and see even more clearly than this, but at this price you're hard-pressed finding anything to match the InfiRay. I know of one pro shooter who bought an RL42 as a cheap rimfire thermal, almost an afterthought, so his offsider could use it while he was shooting, and he's so impressed that he's now ditching all of his more expensive thermals and going for a suite of Ricohs, I should say. I certainly like to see my target clearly. I want perfect target recognition. Not something thermals are good at, but the InfiRays are above average at that by current thermal standards. A few times I had to be patient before I could tell for sure what the difference was between a ruse head and a fox's in tricky conditions. Once I got all excited about a cat in the crosshairs, turned out to be a brush-tailed possum. It always pays to be patient and wait before you pull the trigger, so you're absolutely certain. But the Ricoh does help. The vast majority of occasions, the InfiRays provided instant target ID. Even a sprinting wombat was clearly not a pig, and the roo and the deer in the thistles were clearly differentiated. The other notable point about the Ricohs is its fine heat differentiation helps a lot in reading the terrain. It's not a daylight clear sort of image, but I could certainly see contours and crests better than I expected that I would, and every little bit helps. The photos and videos from the Ricohs are not high res, but it's probably only media types like me who are going to whinge about that sort of thing. Display them on social media or on your mobile device and you're not going to complain about the quality at all. It's good. The only thing to note is that the software doesn't record any of the extra detail like picture-in-picture in the display. None of the menu that might be showing when you're recording shows up, none of the steps of zeroing and so on. There's also no sound recording. The app allows you to download pics and footage, of course, Wi-Fi to a remote screen so you can watch separately what's happening through the scope, even more than one screen if you want to. It's a bit clunky to use the app at first, but it's easily learnt. It could use some development to streamline its operation, but it certainly does the job. As I said, InfiRay is asserting itself aggressively in the thermal market here in Australia, leading with the promise of very good specifications at seriously attractive prices. Both the Ricoh RH50 and RL42 deliver on the promise. Their image quality is certainly very good, they've got great features, and compared with their competitors, they're very well priced. Which of the two would you buy? Honestly, I can't split them on value. With money to spend, I'd definitely buy the 50, but on a budget, I'd be very content to get the 42 because both scopes work very, very well. Mate, what should we do about the lack of sound? Special effects? Dub in some voice? I don't know, how's this? Bang, bang thwack, bang. Haha, you missed it, dickhead. Shut your gob. Bang thwack.